He came limping down the alley with a broken cane, ragged clothes clinging to his sunken body, and eyes that had seen more than 100 battles, though no one there had ever seen him fight. The marketplace fell silent, not out of respect, but confusion. What was this filthy beggar doing, walking straight toward the fighting ring? He didn't speak. He never did. No one knew his name. In the village, they called him Ghost. They said he used to be a soldier. Others claimed he was a madman who'd lost everything in a fire and wandered ever since. One thing everyone agreed on: he was pitiful, harmless. The ring was set up in the middle of the street, surrounded by shouting crowds and the metallic clinking of coin bets. The fighters were local heroes, disciplined, muscular, tattooed warriors trained in the ancient arts. They were the kind of men you didn't dare look in the eyes unless you were ready to bleed. And yet, here he was, the beggar, dragging one foot behind him, dirt-covered, limping, and heading straight for the ring. Laughter erupted, not from the crowd, but from the 3 fighters standing near the ropes. Shirtless, confident, they pointed at the old man like he was part of the entertainment. "Look at this relic," one shouted. "Maybe he thinks it's a soup line," another joked. The third smirked. "You lost, old man? Or are you here to die?" The crowd joined in. Mockery echoed between the buildings. People chuckled. Some pulled out their phones to record. It was supposed to be a fight night. 3 local champions, 3 matches, and a cash prize. No one had invited a beggar, but no one stopped him either. He said nothing. His face was unreadable. He didn't even look at the men laughing at him. He only looked at the ring, and then, to everyone's disbelief, he climbed in. Whispers turned into gasps. Some laughed louder, thinking this was a joke. Others leaned forward, sensing something strange. The fighters hesitated just for a second, not because they feared him, but because he didn't look afraid, not at all. One of the men stepped forward, the biggest of the 3. He cracked his knuckles, grinned wide, and circled the beggar like a lion toying with a wounded prey. "No rules, old man," he sneered. "You sure about this?" The beggar didn't answer. He didn't raise his hands. He didn't even blink. Then it happened. A blur, a breath, a single step forward, and a punch, so fast, so sharp, so devastating that it seemed to come from another world. The giant dropped, his eyes rolled back, his body crumbled like a building with no foundation, flat on the ground, out cold, one hit. Silence. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't move. It was as if time itself paused. The 2 other fighters froze. The laughter died in their throats. They looked at the beggar like they had just witnessed a ghost, or something worse. The beggar turned without a word. He stepped out of the ring, slowly, limping again, as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't just knocked out a trained warrior with one punch. No one dared stop him. No one even breathed. By the time people looked up from the fallen fighter, the beggar had already vanished into the crowd, swallowed by the narrow streets like he had never been there at all. But he had, and everything changed after that day. Some say he was an assassin in hiding. Others say he was cursed, that the punch took a piece of his soul each time he used it. Videos of the moment flooded the internet. Frame by frame, people analyzed the motion, the speed, the precision. Experts were baffled. Fighters from across the country began searching for him. But he didn't come back. Not yet. And no one knew who he really was. Only one thing was certain. You don't mock the man who walks with ghosts. The village where the fight took place was small, almost forgotten. Tucked between modern cities and ancient traditions, it held an uneasy blend of progress and poverty. Neon signs lit up tea shops while barefoot children played in alleys. It was the kind of place where honor still meant something, and reputation could make or end you. At the center of it all was Master Joe's dojo, an old-school martial arts school that had trained some of the region's best fighters for decades. The 3 men who mocked the beggar were all disciples of Joe. They trained under his strict code: discipline, power, legacy. At least that's what Master Joe believed. But as his school grew popular online, the discipline began to rot. Fighters started chasing likes instead of honor, fame instead of skill. And Joe, aging and tired, turned a blind eye until the beggar came. After the punch, Joe watched the footage over and over again. He wasn't watching the fallen student. He was watching the beggar's stance, the shift of his weight, the rotation of the hips, the complete absence of wasted movement. It was perfect technique, ancient, deadly, precise, and he had seen it before. 35 years ago, in a different time, Joe had studied with a legendary but secretive monk. The man had taught him a forbidden form, an art known as the Silent Way. No grunting, no telegraphing. Every strike was like a whisper, and every whisper meant death. But that monk had disappeared after a tragic incident, and the style was said to have died with him. Now, Joe wondered, was that beggar his son, his student, or worse, his executioner? Meanwhile, the two surviving fighters, Jin and Wei, were spiraling. Jin couldn't sleep. He replayed the moment over and over in his mind. "One punch," he kept muttering. "Just one." His pride had shattered like glass. His fear was growing, and he was desperate to find the man again, not to fight him, but to beg for answers. Wei, on the other hand, was angry, furious. He didn't believe it. He told reporters it was fake, a fluke. He called the beggar a lucky lunatic and swore revenge. "Next time," he said, "I'll break him in half, camera or no camera." But deep down, even Wei hesitated when walking near the alley where it happened. Word spread. Fighters came from far cities looking for the Silent Man. Some offered money, others a challenge. None found him, but someone else was looking too. Detective Liang, a former fighter himself, now in his late 40s, working cold cases for the regional police. When the video reached him, he didn't see a viral moment. He saw a ghost from a case long buried. 12 years ago, a man had wiped out an underground fight ring in Shanghai. 4 men dead, all killed with a single punch. No sound, no trace. Liang had seen the crime scene, and what haunted him most was the silence. No screams, no signs of struggle, just bodies dropped like puppets. He remembered something that stuck with him, the way their jaws had broken, clean, identical fractures, like a signature. Now, watching this video, his stomach turned. It was the same strike, the same fracture, the same ghost. Back in the village, a small boy named Xiao, who sold dumplings near the market, had been the only one brave enough to follow the beggar after the knockout. He'd seen him disappear behind an old temple, barely visible through the fog. The boy never told anyone, not out loud, but each morning he left 2 buns and a flask of warm tea at the foot of the temple gate. They were always gone by sunrise. Sometimes the boy would see footprints in the dirt, barefoot, light, almost like they floated. This story wasn't just about a fight. It was about something much older, something forgotten, a technique passed down in whispers, a vengeance buried in silence, and a man who didn't speak because he had already said too much with his fists. 3 days after the punch that stopped the town, Master Joe rang the temple bell, loud, sharp, urgent. It hadn't rung in over a decade. The sound echoed through the streets like a war drum. Every fighter in the village knew what it meant. A challenge had been issued, not just for a match, but for honor, for truth, and perhaps for revenge. But no name had been written on the board, only one word: return. Whispers filled the village. Is he coming back? Is he even real? What if the old man rings the bell and no one answers? Meanwhile, Master Joe sat alone inside the dojo, staring at an old photograph. It showed him as a young man smiling beside his brother. A man with sharp eyes, calm presence, and silence behind every step. That man had vanished after a tragedy that Joe never spoke of. Some said he died. Others, that he lost his mind after a forbidden fight went wrong. Joe knew the truth. His brother had walked away from the world and taken the silent way with him. But now it had returned, in the body of a broken man who walked like a ghost and hit like thunder. While the village buzzed, the two surviving fighters, Jin and Wei, took different paths. Jin, shaken by the knockout, withdrew from the public eye. He started training in private, desperate to learn what he'd missed. He visited monks, read forgotten scrolls, watched slow-motion breakdowns of the beggar's punch over and over again. Something about it wasn't just physical, it was spiritual, controlled, perfect. He didn't want revenge anymore, he wanted understanding. Wei, however, burned hotter. His pride had turned into poison. Online, he went viral for challenging the beggar publicly, daily live streams, interviews. "This time, he won't get lucky," he'd say to the camera. "This time, we fight for real." He organized an underground match. No rules, no rounds, winner takes all. And he sent the invitation directly to the temple gate, tied to a stone covered in his blood. The beggar didn't respond, not with words. But the next morning, the stone was gone. Detective Liang was now fully invested. He visited Master Joe in the dojo, revealing what he had kept secret for years: the murders in Shanghai, the identical fractures, the whisper punch, the mystery man who vanished without a trace. He brought photos, crime reports, autopsies. Joe didn't flinch. "I know what you're afraid of," the old master said. "It's not fear," Liang replied. "It's truth, and it's coming back." On the night of the underground match, the abandoned factory outside town was packed. Crowds lined the catwalks, camera crews set up hidden feeds, big money changed hands behind closed doors, people flew in from other cities, even ex-fighters showed up in disguise just to see if the legend was real. Wei entered the ring first, fully geared, gloves off, knuckles taped, a tiger tattoo curled across his back like a threat. He waited. 1 minute passed, then 2, then 10. People began to murmur. Some laughed, but then the back door creaked open and he entered. No shoes, no trainer, no bag, just silence. The beggar, no limp this time. He stepped into the ring without ceremony. No announcement, no stare down. He didn't even raise his hands. Wei laughed out loud. "You think this is going to end the same way?" he shouted. The beggar didn't answer. He closed his eyes and exhaled. Wei charged, first with a right hook, missed, then a kick to the ribs, caught. The beggar twisted his body like smoke and sidestepped. He moved like water, never stiff, never loud. Every counter was a whisper, every touch a warning. But he didn't strike back, not yet. Wei grew more frantic, furious. His attacks became wild, and then mid-spin the beggar stepped forward. And the punch landed, not hard, not fast, but in perfect alignment. Wei's body shut down before it hit the ground, out cold. Again. This time the crowd didn't cheer. They stood, silent, watching the beggar leave the ring. But something was different. As he stepped into the shadows, he turned, just slightly, and made eye contact with Master Joe, who had been watching from a hidden corner. And for the first time, he spoke. Just one word. Brother. The conflict had only just begun. After that second knockout, the beggar was no longer just a myth. He was a storm that had passed through and left fear in the bones of every fighter who witnessed him. But more than fear, he left questions. Too many questions. The video of Wei collapsing after a single, almost gentle punch hit 30 million views in 3 days. Experts online argued. Some said it was pressure point manipulation. Others claimed it was hypnosis. A few insisted it was fake, but the fighters who had seen it in person, they didn't argue. They didn't sleep. In the background, Detective Liang quietly reopened the Shanghai case files. He pulled security footage from old archives, satellite images, and began to piece together a timeline that had long been buried. He cross-referenced footage of the beggar from the fight with images from 12 years ago. The walk was the same. The shoulder tilt, the left-handed lean. It was him. Liang was sure now, this man wasn't a mystery, he was a fugitive, but when he tried to submit a warrant to higher authorities, the request was blocked. Silenced. There was someone else watching this man, and someone powerful wanted him left alone. Back in the village, Xiao, the dumpling boy, had started leaving handwritten notes with the food at the temple gate. Just small things. "Are you okay?" Or, "That was amazing." Sometimes he drew pictures, a punch, a fist, a falling giant. The old man never replied. But one morning, Xiao found a folded note under the flask. It said only, "Pain remembers." Inside the dojo, Master Zhou was training alone for the first time in years. His movements were sharp, angry, focused. He was preparing not for a match, but for an ending. The truth had arrived in the form of a beggar, and that truth came wearing the face of someone he once loved, his brother. He remembered the day they parted, a forbidden duel behind monastery walls, a student dead. Zhou had stayed, the brother had vanished, the temple disbanded, the silent way was buried. Until now. He blamed himself for the death, for the silence, for the return, but he knew what had to be done. If the beggar returned again, there would be no ring, no crowd, only one final match, brother against brother. Meanwhile, Jin, the first fighter humiliated by the beggar, had traveled north in search of answers. Rumor had it, an ancient monk in the mountains had trained in something similar. Jin hiked for 3 days before reaching a small shrine. There he met a man with no name who said simply, "You don't learn the silent way, you survive it." Jin stayed. He didn't want revenge anymore. He wanted to understand why one punch could unravel everything he thought he knew about strength. Across town, Wei, who had woken from the second knockout, was now paralyzed from the waist down. Doctors said there was no spinal trauma, no brain injury, but he couldn't move. He just stared at the ceiling, whispering one phrase over and over. "He didn't even hit me." The pressure around the village built like a tightened spring. Rumors spread that international fighters were arriving to challenge the beggar. A Korean champion, a Brazilian jiu-jitsu phenom, even an American MMA fighter had posted, "I'll be there soon. If he's man enough, he'll face me." But the beggar didn't respond. Not with words. Not online, only with action. Late one night, a fire broke out in an abandoned warehouse. No one knew why. Inside, they found the charred remains of old fighting equipment, and in the center, a message burned into the floorboards with oil. "The last fight is for silence." Every story has a center, and this one was getting close. To the moment where everything would collapse or be revealed. It happened on a Thursday. The village woke up to military trucks lining the roads. Uniformed men with no visible insignia began setting up perimeters around the temple, the dojo, and every alley the beggar was known to walk. They didn't speak to the locals. They didn't explain their presence, and no one dared ask. The beggar had disappeared again. No footprints, no empty flask, not even Xiao's dumplings had been touched. It was as if he had vanished into the mist that rolled down from the mountains overnight. But that same morning, something else surfaced. A name. Liu Sheng. Someone had leaked a decades-old classified report to the press. The document outlined a secret martial arts program run by a now-defunct military branch during the late 80s. Its purpose, to develop human weapons using forbidden techniques, emotional suppression, neural pressure targeting, and total combat silence. There were only 3 known subjects. One had gone insane, one had died during testing, the third was listed as missing. Codename Ghost Fist, real name Liu Sheng. And with that leak, the world suddenly knew who the beggar was. The news spread like wildfire. Podcasts, news stations, underground fight forums. "Ghost Fist is real," they said. "He's here, and he's dangerous." A bounty was posted online, $500,000 to anyone who could defeat him on camera. Within hours, bounty hunters and rogue fighters began arriving in the village, some disguised as tourists, others openly carrying gear and scars. The village was no longer a place of tradition. It had become a trap. Meanwhile, Master Joe stood in the center of his dojo, surrounded by silence. He had closed the school indefinitely. His students had all left, some out of fear, others out of shame. Only Jin had sent a letter. "Master, I understand now. The punch is not about strength, it's about stillness. I'm not ready to return, but when I do, I will be." Joe folded the letter and placed it beneath a candle. Then slowly, he removed the scroll hidden behind the altar. It was the original doctrine of the Silent Way. There were only 6 techniques, and the 6th had never been mastered. Only attempted once, by Liu Sheng. Detective Liang had begun putting pieces together too quickly for his own safety. He traced Liu Sheng's last military appearance to a covert operation where a rival squad was found dead. No wounds, no trauma, but all with identical neck fractures. The case had been sealed. Now, someone was watching Liang's moves. He received a message in a blank envelope at his hotel room. Inside, a photo of his wife, taken that morning. A threat, clear as day. He packed his files and fled the city that same night, but not before sending everything he had to Master Joe with a note. "If he's your brother, only you can stop what's coming." And then the beggar returned, not walking, not limping, running. Xiao was the first to see him. Midday, market buzzing, no announcement. He came out of an alley barefoot, blood on his knuckles, shirt torn at the shoulder, his face calm but different, like a storm was waiting behind his eyes. He walked to the town square, climbed onto the old fighting platform, and sat, silent, waiting. It wasn't a challenge, it was an invitation. Within the hour, the square filled with people, locals, fighters, journalists, bounty hunters, and finally, Master Joe. The crowd parted as he stepped through, robes tight, eyes steady. No expression on his face, but his fists were clenched beneath the fabric. He climbed onto the platform, stood across from Liu Sheng, no announcer, no bell, no rules, just 2 old brothers, one who walked away from silence and one who became it. Master Joe spoke first, his voice barely a whisper. "Why now?" Liu Sheng didn't answer. He only opened his hand and placed it over his heart, and then tapped the ground once with his knuckles. A signal. Begin. The crowd vanished from their minds. Only movement remained. Zhou attacked first, fast, controlled. A palm strike meant to stun, followed by a sweep. Liu evaded like water, countering with the signature pivot step of the Silent Way. They moved in complete rhythm, as if choreographed by memory. But with every strike came danger. These were not practice moves. This was a duel written in history. Then Liu paused. He backed away and raised one finger. He was about to use the 6th technique, the final whisper. Joe's eyes widened. He'd only seen it once, and it ended in death. But before Liu completed the move, he stopped, lowered his hand, and whispered, "I don't want to finish this." The entire crowd held its breath. Joe, breathing hard, dropped to one knee and smiled. Then it's not over yet. That moment changed everything. Liu Sheng had returned not for destruction, but for redemption. But now that the world knew his name, redemption might be the most dangerous path of all. For the next 48 hours, the world seemed to freeze. Footage of the duel between Liu Sheng and Master Joe flooded every corner of the internet. But it wasn't just another viral fight. This was something else, something primal, sacred. Two old warriors, speaking a language of silence and motion, a language few could understand, but everyone felt. No one had won, no one had lost. But everyone watching knew something deep had shifted. The authorities moved quickly. Surveillance drones circled the village. Communications were jammed, journalists were turned away at checkpoints, but still the footage spread, mirrored, re-uploaded, dissected frame by frame. No one could stop it. And then came the official statement: the man known as Liu Sheng is to be considered highly dangerous. He is connected to a defunct and illegal martial research project and must be brought in for questioning. Any civilian interference will be prosecuted. But the people didn't buy it. In forums, chat rooms, and private encrypted channels, a new name began to circulate. Not Ghostfist, not Fugitive, the Last Master. In the village, the atmosphere changed. Some feared Liu's presence would bring more danger. Others felt the opposite, that the village was now under the protection of something ancient. Children whispered his name like a legend. Elders began speaking of old stories thought to be myths. And Master Joe? He closed the dojo permanently. He said nothing to his students, only this, written on the gate in calligraphy: "Silence taught me what pride never could." Then he left. No one saw him board a train. No one saw him pack. He simply disappeared, leaving behind a generation of fighters who now had to face the truth. They were never truly strong, just loud. Wei, still in the hospital, had stopped speaking, not out of trauma, but realization. He began training his breath, meditation, focus, stillness. Nurses reported him spending hours staring at his own hands, as if trying to understand what they meant beyond violence. Jin, still in the mountains, received the video late. He didn't flinch. He simply bowed to the screen and whispered, "Thank you." He was no longer chasing the man. He was chasing the path. But Liu Sheng, now fully revealed to the world, could no longer walk in shadows. One night, Xiao, the dumpling boy, found him sleeping outside the old temple, curled beneath a blanket of leaves and dust. "Why don't you hide?" the boy asked. Liu opened one eye. "I did. And now I wait." "For who?" Liu didn't answer. But deep inside, he knew exactly who was coming. Thousands of kilometers away, in a black glass tower, a silent boardroom watched the video of the duel on a loop. One man finally spoke. "He's awakened it." Another replied, "Then we activate the others." Files were pulled, names, faces, coordinates. They weren't the only ones trained in the silent way. Liu Sheng was the last to leave, but not the last to exist. Now, they were coming back too, not to fight him, but to stop him. For Liu, the fight with Zhou hadn't been an ending. It had been a signal. The world wasn't finished with him, and worse, his past wasn't finished with the world. Liu Sheng stayed near the temple ruins for days. He said nothing to the villagers, didn't ask for food, didn't run. He simply waited. He knew what was coming, not just the bounty hunters, not the government teams, not the internet fame. He had walked this path before. He had seen what power without peace became. And now he was preparing not to fight them, but to fight himself. Late one evening, he sat alone in the garden where he and his brother had once trained as boys. A space once filled with laughter, now silent under the weight of memory. The moon reflected in the shallow pond nearby, its surface still until a ripple, not in the water, in his breath. The sixth technique, the final whisper, was incomplete. Not because he couldn't perform it, but because something inside him always broke when he tried. Fear, not of failure, but of who he had to become to finish it. It had cost lives before. In Shanghai, in the jungle operations, in the underground tournament that was erased from official memory. Every time he used it, someone stopped breathing. And now he wondered, was he afraid of the technique, or of the man who had once used it without mercy. Then came the visit. A woman, maybe in her 30s, strong posture, sharp eyes. She walked into the garden barefoot, dressed like a civilian, but her aura gave her away instantly. She had been trained, not just in combat, but in the silent way. She said nothing for a full minute. Then finally, "You left the gate open." Liu nodded. "I expected you sooner." Her voice was calm. "I had to see if you'd use it again." "I almost did, but you didn't." "No," Liu said. "I'm trying to forget." She stepped closer. "I didn't come here to stop you, Liu Sheng. I came to remind you. You don't get to forget, not after what we did." He closed his eyes. She continued. "They're coming. All of them. They think you're trying to revive the order. I'm not. They don't care." Then she paused. "Do you still remember the 7th step?" Liu looked at her sharply. There was no 7th. She smiled sadly. "There is now." That night, Liu meditated until sunrise. The 7th step. It wasn't in any scroll, not part of any doctrine, but maybe that was the point. The silent way was never about techniques. It was about transcendence, to fight without ego, to defend without rage, to strike without sound or consequence. He had failed that for years. But now, for the first time, he wondered if the final mastery wasn't about defeating others, but forgiving himself. Meanwhile, in the village, Xiao continued his small morning ritual, leaving tea and bread near the temple. But this time, something new waited for him, a folded piece of cloth. He opened it, revealing a small, hand-stitched sash, once worn by students of the Silent Way, and underneath it, a note in Liu's handwriting: "Strength is not in fists, it's in stillness. One day you will understand." Across the country, bounty hunters began disappearing, one by one. No bodies, no noise. Rumors whispered of a masked figure eliminating them before they could reach the village. And in every case, there was a calling card left behind, a single line burned into the ground with charcoal: "The path is closed." Liu Sheng was no longer hiding from the world. He was preparing for what came after it. And far in the mountains, Jin stood barefoot in the snow, breathing in perfect rhythm, surrounded by pine trees. For the first time in his life, his body was still, but his mind was clear. He smiled, not because he had grown stronger, but because he had grown quieter, and deep inside he knew he would return, not to fight Liu Sheng, but to walk beside him. Growth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's a breath, a pause, a whisper that says, "You don't have to be who you were." The village had changed. What once was a quiet, overlooked town now pulsed with the quiet tension of something ancient reawakening. The streets were calm on the surface, but every shopkeeper, every elder, every child knew the storm was coming, and everyone was watching one man, Liu Sheng. He no longer avoided the world. Each morning, he walked the narrow paths barefoot, stopping at the same 5 places: the old market, the pond near the garden, the abandoned dojo, the stone temple, and Xiao's dumpling cart. He said nothing, smiled rarely, but his presence meant something now. He was no longer a beggar, he was a warning. Word began to spread through closed circles and encrypted networks: the return of the way. Some said Liu was building an army. Others believed he was seeking atonement. But all agreed on one thing: he wasn't done, not yet. Jin finally returned from the mountains, leaner, quieter, stronger. His movements had changed, not faster, but more deliberate. He found Liu meditating at the edge of the temple ruins and bowed deeply. Liu opened one eye. "You found your silence," he said. Jin nodded. "I didn't know I had been yelling my whole life." Neither man smiled, but the connection was clear. Liu didn't need followers, but now he had one, not by force, but by choice. Elsewhere, the final pieces began to move. From the north came Takashi, a former assassin turned underground master, said to have defected from the same military program Liu once escaped. He arrived wearing silence like a second skin. From the west came Sasha Volkov, a Russian grappling prodigy raised in a monastery where pain was a language. She had fought in underground cages with no rules, no lights, no mercy. And from the south came Amari, a woman trained in desert exile by elders who taught her how to kill without touching. Her presence alone lowered the temperature of any room she entered. They weren't there for money. They weren't there for glory. They had come for balance. They had been trained in other ways, deviations, branches, evolutions of the silent way. All of them believed Liu Sheng was a threat to that balance. Some wanted to fight him, others wanted to stop what he might unleash. But none came lightly. Master Zhou, hidden in exile, received word of their approach through a messenger with no tongue. When asked if he would return, he wrote only, "If silence is broken, the earth must answer." Back in the village, Liu began building something by hand. Not a shrine, not a weapon. A ring, not made of metal, but of stone and wood. No ropes, just a circle drawn in sacred symmetry. Xiao helped, dragging small stones and water jugs while asking no questions. At sunset, Liu placed a final piece in the center, a single black sash. It fluttered in the wind like a flag. No invitations were sent, no names were called, but they came anyway. Takashi first, then Sasha, then Amari. One by one they entered the village not as invaders, but as shadows. All of them stood before the ring. All of them understood. This would not be a tournament. This would be a reckoning. Not just of strength, but of silence. And in the final hours before the sun fell behind the mountains, Liu sat quietly at the edge of the ring, waiting. Because he knew the fight wouldn't begin with fists. It would begin with a decision, and someone would not walk away. The night fell like a curtain. No stars, no wind, just the hum of tension in the air, so heavy it felt like the world was holding its breath. At the center of the village, under the old fig tree, the ring stood quiet. Stone, wood, dust, no ropes, no judges. No crowd, just the circle and those who had come to cross it. Liu Sheng stood barefoot in the center. No stance, no guard, no expression. His body still as stone, but his pulse beat with something deeper than fear. Purpose. Takashi entered first. He moved like shadow on silk, wearing black gloves, his eyes half lowered, head tilted in silence. Once a fellow subject in the program, he had chosen exile instead of escape. He believed Liu had broken the balance. "You were the beginning of the end," Takashi whispered. "No," Liu said calmly, "I was the beginning of the truth." Takashi bowed. The fight began with no signal. Takashi was speed. Liu was gravity. Their feet moved faster than most eyes could track. Palms collided with near-silent impacts that cracked the air. Each strike was a conversation, each evasion a refusal. Then, the opening. Takashi slid low, sweeping Liu's leg, but Liu pivoted mid-air, reversing the move into a short-range shoulder strike that sent Takashi crashing into the dirt. Silence. Takashi didn't move, not out of injury, but respect. He tapped the earth once with his open palm, then stood and stepped back from the ring. No anger, only understanding. Sasha Volkov stepped forward next. Her size alone dwarfed Liu. She had hands like bricks and eyes like frost, but it wasn't power that made her dangerous. It was control. "I do not believe in whispers," she said, "only pain." Liu nodded. "Then you never learned what silence can hold." The first blow echoed through the night like thunder. Sasha charged with brute strength, fists crashing down